The world will tell you to be kind, to forgive endlessly, and to put love above everything else. But let's be real, kindness without strategy makes you weak, forgiveness without boundaries makes you a target, and blind love destroys more lives than it saves. If Machiavelli were alive today, he would tell you the harsh truth: survival in this modern world demands that you become cold-blooded, even with the people closest to you. Parenting, family, school, work, business, none of these environments reward softness. They reward clarity, boundaries, and the courage to act without guilt. Today, we're going to strip away the lies, confront the uncomfortable, and see how cold-bloodedness is not cruelty, it's survival. A teenager slams their bedroom door after their parents confiscate their phone for the third failing report card. The parents feel guilty and consider returning it to keep the peace. If Machiavelli lived now, he would not negotiate comfort for performance. He would sit the child down, remove the drama, and turn consequences into a precise training regimen. The phone returns only after measurable progress, grades, tutor sessions, a calendar of study blocks verified by the parent. He would frame the punishment as an investment in the child's future, not revenge, and teach the child to convert delayed gratification into a habit. Public displays of empathy are for theater. Private discipline that produces results is the currency he values. He would be visibly distant, not cruel, detached enough that the child learns success must be earned, affection is conditional on responsibility, and excuses are worthless in the market of opportunity. When a preschooler screams for a toy at the grocery store and the parent reflexively reaches into their wallet to quiet the scene, Machiavelli would see the cost beyond the moment. He would make scarcity and consequence visible to the child. No tantrum earns reward, and desires are met through earned behavior. He'd instruct parents to convert small daily interactions into a curriculum of accountability, chores tied to purchases, charts that visibly track earned privileges, and consistent, unemotional follow-through when rules are broken. The message the child learns is transactional competence. The world does not respond to feelings, it responds to actions. Love, in this design, is not coddling. It is deliberate conditioning that trains the child to understand negotiation, trade-offs, and value before the world demands those lessons in harsher ways. Two parents disagree about letting their high schooler quit a steady, well-paid vocational track to chase a risky creative dream. Instead of sentimental speeches about happiness, Machiavelli would force a pragmatic experiment, a timed, reversible trial with measurable milestones. He'd require the teenager to pursue the creative path while securing fallback security, part-time work, savings goals, documented pitch attempts, so the dream is not an excuse for sloth. He would remove moral comfort from the choice and replace it with a contract: succeed by X date or return to the previously agreed path. By institutionalizing failure as a diagnostic tool rather than a shameful end, he teaches the child that choices have structured consequences and that love expresses itself by refusing to let fantasy replace strategy. In a co-parenting conflict where an ex uses visitation as leverage, threatening to withhold weekends to punish compliance, Machiavelli would treat custody like a negotiation table, not a bargaining chip. He would document every interaction, create clear, non-negotiable routines, and communicate in unemotional, paper-trail-friendly language. He'd set boundaries that are enforceable, mediated agreements, precise schedules, and public reminders, so the other parent's attempts to weaponize affection become costly and predictable rather than chaotic. Where emotions once ruled, he would substitute process and predictability. This deprives manipulators of the dramatic fuel they crave and signals to the child that stability trumps theatrics. A sibling calls and asks for a large, emergency loan on the pretense of crisis, and the family meeting devolves into guilt and pleading. Machiavelli's approach is not to refuse out of coldness but to transform assistance into leverage that protects the giver. He would attach clear terms, repayment schedule, collateral, and small milestone checkpoints. He might propose conditional aid, funding for a job skills course instead of cash, or transform the request into a formal family contract witnessed by others. His goal is to prevent pity from creating dependency. He would design help so that it either builds autonomy or stops, decisively, where it begins enabling harm. Guilt becomes structure. Aid becomes investment, and emotional blackmail is neutralized by predictable, impersonal systems. When a family group chat ignites at midnight over a relative's life choices and everyone multiplies accusations, Machiavelli would not join the chorus. He would pick the single thread that matters, control of the narrative, and pull it quietly. He'd call out falsehoods with calm facts, offer a private, recorded mediation to diffuse the public spectacle, and publicly refuse to be drawn into the mob. Silence, in his hands, is a weapon. Withholding reaction removes oxygen from drama and forces others to either escalate to absurdity or lose momentum. He would also seed alliances, private messages to key family members who can influence the group, so eventual outcomes are steered without public theatrics. In short, stop the spectacle, privatize the negotiation, and make consequences inevitable rather than performative. An elderly parent insists on moving into your small apartment and the household begins to suffocate under expectations and resentment. Machiavelli would treat this like a sovereignty problem, negotiate terms as if contracting with a sovereign neighbor. He'd write down responsibilities, schedules, financial contributions, and boundaries about privacy and decision-making. He'd delegate care to a mix of paid services and rotating family responsibilities, creating transparent accountability that prevents resentment from becoming covert sabotage. If the arrangement threatens your work or prospects, he'd prefer a measured refusal with a plan, alternative living solutions or staged financial support, over a passive acceptance that erodes long-term stability. The aim is not cruelty but a clear preservation of resources and life trajectory. A dispute over a small family business explodes into accusations, insults, and threats to ruin one another. Machiavelli would immediately stop the emotional exchange and convert it into formalized negotiations, independent valuations, mediated clauses, and temporary operational controls. He'd recruit neutral professionals, accountants, lawyers, to remove the personal element from the economic reality, and quietly gather allies among stakeholders who have influence. He would make it cheaper for opponents to settle rationally than to fight, using deadlines and external reviews to force decisive outcomes. Emotion becomes noise, paperwork and leverage become the language of resolution. This converts family drama into business discipline and makes betrayal costly rather than cathartic. When a parent watches other kids and the PDA outperform theirs academically and social capital is being traded at school events, Machiavelli would teach tactical reputation management. He'd advise parents to cultivate relationships with specific teachers and administrators, volunteer in visible roles that showcase the child's talents, and orchestrate subtle public displays of competence, projects, presentations, or competitions, so the child's perceived value rises. He would avoid shallow popularity contests and instead invest in targeted influence that produces concrete outcomes, letters of recommendation, early access to programs, or inside knowledge about scholarships. The lesson to the child and parent alike is that social capital is built strategically. It is not spontaneous kindness but orchestrated contribution that unlocks doors. When a child is the target of exclusion and the parent's instinct is to protect and protest, Machiavelli would argue for tactical resilience training. He'd have the child learn to convert exclusion into motivation, mastering a skill that becomes undeniable in the social marketplace, creating parallel circles of influence through clubs or online platforms, and using public competence as a rebuttal to social marginalization. Rather than publicly shaming the perpetrators, he would encourage quiet accumulation of visible wins, contest trophies, viral projects, leadership roles, that changed the social balance. In a world where optics determine opportunities, the child learns that power is a cruel, not complaint. If a teacher repeatedly dismisses a child's potential and a parent contemplates an angry confrontation, Machiavelli would recommend a softer but more effective route: information asymmetry. He'd gather clear evidence, tests, samples of work, outside assessments, then schedule a private, solution-focused meeting with the teacher and administrator. He'd offer to solve a problem for the teacher, volunteering resources, suggesting curriculum supplements, so the teacher has skin in the solution and becomes an ally rather than an adversary. By converting confrontation into mutual benefit, he neutralizes bias without theatrics, turning institutional inertia into discrete leverage on behalf of the child. A parent must decide between loading their child's schedule with every prestige extracurricular and leaving time for free play. Machiavelli would evaluate each activity by its future return, networking value, demonstrable skills, visibility, and ruthlessly trim what doesn't move the needle. He'd tolerate short-term complaints or loneliness if the activity builds a tangible edge for college or career. He'd also teach the child to frame sacrifices as strategic investments, not punishments, so compliance is a partnership rather than coercion. Compassion exists, but it is subordinated to the long-term calculus. Time and energy are finite, and a disciplined allocation is how advantage is built. A junior employee watches their colleague take credit for their idea in a Zoom meeting, and the instinct is to storm out or vent to friends. Machiavelli would counsel a different route: reclaim publicly with calm precision, followed by private consolidation. The junior employee would immediately email the team with a concise summary that positions their contribution clearly, then secure endorsements from those who witnessed the work. He would cultivate allies who can corroborate contributions, and avoid burning bridges by turning accusation into documentation. In the modern office, reputation often determines promotion. Machiavelli would use facts, not fury, to reassert ownership and build a record that protects against repeat theft. When a company whispers about restructuring and everyone calls it a family, Machiavelli would view the language as camouflage for self-preservation. He would quietly prepare exit options, polishing a LinkedIn profile, lining up informational interviews, and discreetly reconnecting with past colleagues. But he would not act in panic. Instead, he'd increase his visible value, take on high-impact projects with measurable outcomes and publicize results through internal updates. He'd refuse to demonstrate despair or pleading. His detachment would make him appear less dispensable because it signals competence without neediness. The cold-blooded professional is not heartless. He simply acknowledges fluid loyalties and designs redundancy into his career. Facing an unfair performance review where emotion is being weaponized against you, Machiavelli would attack the narrative, not the person. He'd compile hard metrics, timelines, and testimonials that contradict the biased account, and present a succinct, forward-looking plan that reframes perceived weaknesses as solvable problems tied to concrete milestones. Simultaneously, he'd search for leverage, external offers, cross-functional allies, or outcomes only he can deliver, and quietly let the boss know the cost of misjudging him. He would not enter an argument. He would convert blame into structured improvement and, when necessary, make an unemotional exit that preserves dignity and bargaining power. A promotion decision becomes a popularity contest, and being well-liked is actually a liability. Machiavelli would teach you how to be strategically liked, cultivate a small core of advocates who matter, perform visible acts that benefit decision-makers, and avoid over-investing in friendships that create vulnerabilities. He would advise a posture of measured warmth: be generous where it yields reciprocal advantage, and keep emotional reserves where it risks exploitation. The idea is to appear reliable and calibrated rather than desperate for affection, because influence in an organization is a resource that should be earned, guarded, and deployed with intention, a potential business partner pitches an elegant story and asks you to sign a revenue-sharing agreement that seems generous to them. Machiavelli would first check the documents for asymmetry, then introduce a cooling period. He would attach conditions, phased vesting of equity, clear performance milestones, and escape clauses tied to objective metrics. He might even leak the term sheet's contours to trusted investors to test alternative interest, increasing his leverage without direct conflict. Public charm is easy, enforceable structure is what protects you. If the partner resists transparency, he'd be willing to walk away, because the ability to refuse a bad deal is the single most potent bargaining chip. In a negotiation where the other side uses flattery and personal stories to disarm, Machiavelli would not become sentimental. He would reciprocate with calculated warmth while steering the discussion back to numbers. He'd use silence selectively to make opponents uncomfortable, anchor the negotiation with a non-negotiable term that reflects his true bottom line, and structure communication to create asymmetric costs if the other party stalls. He would also prepare alternative counterparts to avoid being trapped, making a deal contingent on outside interest turns charm into urgency and forces hard concessions. When a competitor launches a brutal pricing war, Machiavelli would not rush to slash prices and bleed. He would analyze where the competitor's pressure is strongest and withdraw strategically from low-margin segments to focus on customer niches that value features over price. He'd use targeted promotions, partnerships, and loyalty structures that make his base sticky while making the competitor fight on terrain where they have no advantage. If necessary, he'd sacrifice a small product line or market to preserve cash and reputation, then re-emerge when the competitor's overreach exhausts them. The key is calculated retreat, not emotional retaliation. In an M&A conversation where founders fight over principle and small shareholders get emotional, Machiavelli would assemble a buffer of professionals, lawyers, bankers, communication strategists, and treat the deal like a chessboard. He'd control timing, leak selective narratives to influence valuation, and isolate the emotional actors by offering them clearly superior, immediate options while preserving the core strategic assets. He'd accept sacrificial terms on tangential pieces to secure control of what truly matters. Public posturing would be choreographed to make the outcome seem inevitable, thereby reducing ramp-up friction. Emotional eruptions are useful only if they change incentives. Otherwise they're liabilities to be neutralized. When a prospective investor tries to play on your fear of scarcity, implying this is the last round and you'll lose your chance, Machiavelli's response is methodical: verify the scarcity, demand proof, and create competing timelines to remove leverage. He'd structure the deal with milestones, performance-based tranches, and penalty clauses for bad faith pressure. If the investor refuses transparency, he'd walk. The lesson: scarcity is a bargaining tool you meet with verification and alternative options, not panic. Being willing to say no calibrates respect and preserves autonomy. In family, school, workplace, and boardroom, Machiavelli would act the same: convert feelings into systems, theatrics into documents, and compassion into calibrated investments that build resilience rather than dependencies. He would be cold-blooded not to punish affection but to protect it, ensuring your love, reputation, and resources do not become weapons in other people's hands. He would act with empathy strategically, never as an automatic override. His detachment would be a tool to manufacture stability, influence, and freedom. The brutal truth is this: if you allow emotions to control you, you will always be at the mercy of those who are willing to act without them. Parents, siblings, children, colleagues, business partners, every relationship is a negotiation, and the only way to protect your future is to stop letting sentimentality dictate your moves. Cold-bloodedness is not the absence of love, it's the discipline to act in a way that protects your power, your time, and your life. If you found value in this message, if it shook you, challenged you, or forced you to rethink how you live, then make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share it with others who need to hear it. Because the more people who wake up to this reality, the fewer victims there will be.